A top health official exits the FDA after the agency puts a hold on shipments of a gene therapy for muscular dystrophy and then reverses itself after a public outcry. Meantime, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he's going to overhaul the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program to make it easier for claimants and their trial lawyers to get payouts.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, editorial board member Kate Batchelder-Odell and columnist Alicia Finley. Vinay Prasad has been the chief regulator for vaccines and biologics since being appointed to the agency in May, but he is now out of the agency as of Tuesday. A government spokesman saying this, Dr. Prasad did not want to be a distraction to the great work of the FDA in the Trump administration and has decided to return to California and spend more time with his family, unquote. But some of the press reports are suggesting that he was ousted amid controversies at the agency. One of these involves a gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. The company says that about 1,000 patients have been treated with it, but after 2 deaths, the FDA moved this month to halt deliveries. And then on Monday, it seemed to have a change of heart. Let's start with a clip of FDA Commissioner Marty Makary discussing this on CNBC.
That was a very temporary hold on the ambulatory population, which has since been restored. The scientists at the FDA wanted to look at that safety signal after some deaths. So I stood behind them. I think the company is pleased with where things are. I can't discuss really any details of our conversations, but we are committed to that rare disease community because you can't possibly do a randomized controlled trial and have these rigorous standards when you have 50 or 100 people in the world that have a rare condition. And we've got to have regulatory flexibility. So we are working on a new pathway called the plausible mechanism pathway, by which we may not even need to see a study. We may just need to see a plausible mechanism and computational modeling suggesting that something is a safe molecule.
Kate, what's going on here with this pause, this FDA pause on this gene therapy?
As larger framing, I think I'd start by saying this is a story about a rare disease, but it has much larger implications because we are at really a frontier of medical innovation with gene therapy where you could start to see a lot of very impressive treatments start to come online. But it matters how we regulate these treatments, what incentives we give for them to come to market. And so this specific case has much larger resonance because any one of us could wake up in the morning one day and someone we love ourselves could need the best that the medical innovation world has to offer. And so I frame that larger salience to invite listeners to come with us into some weeds on this particular drug. This drug called Elevidys was approved by the FDA conditionally about 2 years ago, and then more broadly last year. The FDA asked the company to halt all shipments of the drug earlier this month in July. And the company initially said no, but then later agreed because the FDA basically said, they were prepared to take serious steps to yank it from the market. And now the putative reason for that has been safety concerns. 2 teenage boys passed away tragically after receiving this gene therapy, one in March and one in June. But the company decided, okay, we're going to pause on treating patients who are in this very advanced stage of the disease. This disease is called Duchenne. It puts boys in wheelchairs by 10 or 12. It is progressive muscular disease. So the company said, okay, we've got this gene therapy, but we're getting this emerging safety signal in this population of folks who can't walk anymore. But the FDA came in with a very heavy hand and said, no gene therapy here for anybody who wants to receive it. Even if you're a 4 or 5-year-old and you can still walk, you have a lot more to gain from treatment earlier. And what was really going on here is a discussion about the standards we use to approve drugs. This is not just a question of, is this drug safe? It's really a question of, does the drug work? That is what I think FDA was fundamentally arguing, was just not just the drug was risky, but that it didn't work. In this drug, it was conceived in controversy. It was the chief of the relevant FDA division at the time, Peter Marks, overruled FDA staff to approve it. And so it really became a much larger discussion about relitigating a decision that FDA had made a year ago, which had enormous implications for patients who want to receive it. And also, just like I was talking about at the beginning, for fundamental questions of how do we treat new drugs when they come onto the market.
To that point about the broader themes here, Alicia, part of the conservative movement's arguments on these questions, and including in the first Trump administration, a phrase you heard a lot was right to try. So there are situations, the argument is, where there are people who have bad decisions. They don't have a lot of choices in the drug market. They have a rare disease. They have some kind of cancer where they've run through all the approved treatments. And the question is, what is the standard that you are going to require for a new kind of therapy? And the argument has always been that if there's somebody who's willing to take it, if there's some evidence, if there's some reason to believe that it might work, that patients should have a right to try that. And by the way, this has been part of the argument against socializing medicine more in the United States, is the idea that we are going to end up in situations where there are bureaucrats that are making those decisions instead of patients. And part of the bureaucratic calculation might be, well, this treatment costs a whole lot. And so even if you have cancer, we think that the average benefit of this treatment is maybe 3 months more of life. And we don't think as a bureaucratic entity that is worth that price. So it's notable. I mean, how do you read what this says about the potential shifts of what now a Republican administration, how they're approaching these questions in the FDA?
Well, I think there are a lot of question marks still outstanding. Dr. McCary, in the interview on CNBC on Wednesday, praised Dr. Prasad as a genius. On the other hand, he also said we want to make the FDA more transparent. We want to accelerate approvals. We want to be more flexible. He was saying all the right things, and that conservatives have long espoused and the Trump administration espoused during the first term. The problem is that the agency's actions and his own support for Dr. Prasad and another new regulator that he has appointed, George Tidmarsh, who will now lead the drug review division, contradict his public statements. They are very opposed to accelerating treatments. Without very strong evidence in large randomized controlled trials that they work. And this was the fundamental problem with Vinay Prasad, is he believed that in a very rigid trial designs. He also believed that the FDA shouldn't be approving treatments that he viewed were too costly and provided marginal benefits, and Sarepta's Duchenne therapy being one of them. He had criticized the $3.2 million price tag as too much, and he wanted to turn the FDA into essentially a rationing body. The FDA's job is merely to review drugs and treatments for safety and efficacy. It's not to consider cost. I think Dr. McCary understands that. But nonetheless, some of the people he has appointed, George Tidmarsh and Dr. Prasad, viewed the FDA's purpose as much broader, as in that they should be considering the cost effectiveness of drugs. And I think that that's a continuing concern in the industry. Now, Dr. Prasad had held up as his model the UK's National Health Service, that makes decisions on whether drugs get approved and are available based on price and what they call the quality adjusted years or life years, QALYs, which is basically some kind of statistical calculation of, well, how much quality of life does this drug provide to people, and if they're going to die anyways in a few years, and then they shouldn't get access to this drug. And it's basically is a rationing mechanism. And it's a big reason why Americans have access to a lot more treatments especially cancer treatments that aren't available in the UK, and why the US survival rates for cancers, hard to treat cancers, are actually the highest in the world. Now, yes, our life expectancy is somewhat lower, but the many other developed countries, but that has to do with many other cultural factors, our diets, our lifestyles. It's not because of our treatments or lack of treatments. So I think the issue here is that there continue to be conflicting signs from the FDA, from Dr. McCary, who seems to be saying a lot of the right things, moving in the right directions, but has appointed people who don't share those same beliefs and want to restrict drugs based on their cost.
Alicia mentions Dr. McCarty's defense of Dr. Prasad. Let's listen to a bit of that. This is the FDA commissioner on Monday speaking with Politico.
There's not a political bone to his body. He's an impeccable scientist. I think one of the greatest scientific minds of our generation. Vinay Prasad has done a phenomenal job. His staff love him. The culture there is much improved. And we're seeing great decisions.
Kate, is this an example perhaps of where personnel is policy, and maybe the people at the top of the org chart are saying the right things about accelerated approvals and whatnot, but they are appointing people also who are running segments of the agency?
I think one common thread in some of these appointees at the FDA is that they earned the public trust by casting a lot of skepticism on COVID mandates and lockdowns. And while I don't necessarily share some of the same concerns about COVID vaccines, there is a constituency in the public that is worried about them. So I think that is where a lot of their capital came from. But the thing is that COVID vaccines and the desire to ferret out all the risks that they may portend over a long period of time, that's a very bad overlay to put on developing drugs for rare diseases. And for the reasons McCary was talking about on CNBC. I mean, when you have a disease that is very rare, maybe only a few thousand people in the country have it, it is extremely difficult to test a treatment to the FDA's standards for certainty. And there are also significant concerns about running placebo trials, for instance, on children. We're talking about an infusion here. Infusing somebody with saline is not ethical. And so the consensus on the right has for a long time been that the FDA needs to accept more statistical uncertainty when it's approving drugs, and that when we are at the real frontiers of what we know of in science, there's going to be risks and uncertainty, and that we want FDA to tolerate those risks and uncertainties because that is what moves us further down the field in understanding these diseases better and coming up with better cures for them. And so my concern here is that, to Alicia's point, there is a lot of good articulation about using what are called, secondary endpoints that are likely to predict the drug works, using different kind of analyses in evaluating these drugs that are more flexible and emphasize speed. But then this recent case on Duchenne is really an alarming one because here, for instance, these tragic deaths, two teenagers and then one in a clinical trial for a different disease. So the company Sarepta had dealt with 3 deaths, and the FDA decided to get involved only after the third one, which was in a clinical trial for a different disease. And this raises all sorts of really challenging questions about the nascent gene therapy field. I mean, out of 1,000 doses, 2 deaths, what is the standard? What is the acceptable safety profile? The FDA really didn't articulate that. This clinical trial death happened in a drug where the drug is delivered the same way, but it's a different dose and it's a different drug itself and it's treating a different patient population. So one real worry about that is if I'm a company and I have an approved drug and I'm out doing clinical research, this was an early clinical trial, is my approved drug now on the line for the results of those trials? And so that matters when companies decide whether they're going to invest in these different lines and invest in bringing new drugs to market. And so this episode too, I mean, even if, again, the drug, there is a lot of discussion around the drug's efficacy and whether it works, how much it really helps boys. And the FDA approved it because boys were getting off the floor faster. They were climbing for stairs faster. But the clinical trial's primary aim failed. And that's what the drugs detractors say. The trial failed. It shouldn't have been approved. But even if you conceded that point, it still was approved a year ago. And so you have a fundamental regulatory certainty question with relitigating some of this a year later and relitigating it with no clear guidelines to the public. What does this drug have to do to get back on the market? There were kind of leaks about whether, maybe they'd have to run new trials. That could take, who knows, that could take years to get new trials done. And so it really was an issue, a bad sign from the FDA, both on the merits and showing the flexibility, but also just in predictability and giving the industry a signal that they know what to expect.
Well, on the point about personnel, Alicia, one thing that also bears mentioning is that Dr. Peter Marks, the predecessor of Dr. Prasad, who had stood up for giving patients access to this Duchenne treatment, he was forced out of the agency this year amid clashes with RFK Jr. About vaccines, in particular the COVID vaccines. Here's part of his resignation letter. He wrote, "I was willing to work to address the Secretary's concerns regarding vaccine safety and transparency by hearing from the public and implementing a variety of different public meetings and engagements." He says, however, it has become clear that truth and transparency are not desired by the Secretary, but rather he wishes subservient confirmation of his misinformation and lies, unquote. So make of that what you will. But that is another interesting point here on the personnel matter. It's not only who is going into an agency or an administration, it's who's going out.
Right, and there has been a bit of a brain drain at the FDA, partly owing to the concerns that RFK will start to try to dictate decisions. So you had many agency leaders resign earlier. Dr. Marks appears to have been, he was a career employee. He appears to have resigned because of conflicts over the COVID vaccines. Now, I don't think that the children's COVID vaccine should have been approved based on the little evidence that they did. I think that's a debatable issue, but I think he generally supported faster approvals for these rare and deadly diseases that we've been talking about. That included the Sarepta drug. And I think that extended to just COVID vaccines in general. I think he was generally a force for good. Now, I think the concern, as you said, is now they're bringing in new people. I mentioned Dr. Tidmarsh earlier, who had criticized the agency for essentially peddling or approving expensive placebo drugs that give people false hope and are costly and burdensome on society. And the Sarepta drug was one of those that he identified in an op-ed, and another was an Alzheimer's treatment, Aduhelm, which I wrote about several years ago, in which the agency, again, they did overrule their career staff, or this was actually done by an official Billy Dunn, who has since departed from the agency. But he looked at all the evidence on this drug and found that, well, we think that the benefits outweigh the risk. Some of the data wasn't completely clear and certain, similar to the Sarepta drug review, but that this is essentially a deadly disease that has no alternative treatments, and we're going to approve it anyways, essentially giving patients the right to try it. Now, there was a huge blowback against this Alzheimer's drug, mainly from the left, who believe that, well, unless you get a cure, you're just basically treating people, slowing the progression, and then giving them more life to suck on the healthcare system and be parasites. That may be a little harsh, but that's essentially their opposition to this drug. Now, there has been a couple of other Alzheimer's drugs that have been approved that have similar mechanisms that have essentially supported the FDA's original view that there's a plausible mechanism for this to slow progression and for these drugs to work. And so I think the FDA has been vindicated, but nonetheless, you have these people who are now entering the FDA and being appointed to these leadership positions that continue to raise concerns among the industry that, well, maybe we shouldn't even study all of these anti-amyloid Alzheimer's treatments because there's been a clear bias among the top leaders against this. And this gets to Kate's point that the administration continues to create this uncertainty for the industry, which is chilling investment.
And the point about that uncertainty is it's obviously not great for the patients who are using this gene therapy, and we're told that the shipments would be suspended. But it's also a problem for the next therapy, the next research project. I mean, the numbers are pretty staggering when you go look at the research on what it costs to develop a new drug, the number of drugs that make it partway through the pipeline and then fail. And we really could be entering with the technologies, the advances in biotech, a pretty amazing era of medical innovation if there is the research and the ability to get that stuff started, the regulatory certainty to get companies interested in it.
One facet of this that I think deserves a little more attention. I mean, there's an emerging narrative now that Prasad was pushed out of the FDA because he was standing up against pharmaceutical companies and protecting the public from dangerous drugs. And I think that narrative has enormous factual problems. And one of the key ones would be understanding the risk analysis that patients use when deciding whether to take this gene therapy. So I've spoken with many families with someone with Duchenne muscular dystrophy in their house, and it's a disease that primarily afflicts boys, young boys, and they are aware of what the risks of this gene therapy are. They discuss them with their neurologist. They know that this gene therapy, perhaps the data is mixed. There's some discussion whether, for instance, what they were trying to measure in that trial, was that a good thing to measure? Did it not capture kind of nuanced, preserved muscle function that boys actually have? These parents are informed because they care about making the best medical decision for their child with a devastating disease. And so you had cases like parents who, since it's a genetic condition, have 2 children with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And they had one child who had been dosed with the gene therapy and another child who was in the process of getting it or getting approved for insurance, was in the process of getting set up to be dosed with it when the FDA suddenly pulled the rug out from under them. That, I think, was a completely untenable position for FDA to stay in, and is part of the reason why they had to change course, is because they were getting a lot of feedback from the Duchenne community that these informed parents are capable of understanding what the potential benefits of this therapy are and what its potential risks are. And they and their neurologists are in a better position to decide whether it makes sense to dose their child with it. And to your point about innovation, some of these gene therapies, it's not the only, first of all, this is not the only gene therapy that has potential liver side effects. It's also not the only one that is not a home run, the first iteration of it. The question is, as we learn more, how to make them better, how to make them less toxic, how to make them work better. But if you say, because of something that happens like these tragic deaths, well, we're gonna put the whole thing on halt, you're not going to get those second and third generation therapies that are that move the field forward. And so I think the paternalism that was exhibited about whether people and their doctors can decide whether an improved therapy has enough benefits for them, I think it's odd because it was a function of kind of the early 2000s progressive left that made those arguments. And now we're seeing them kind of pop up again. But again, the agency did make the right decision here by, I think, looking at the evidence and showing, okay, these younger children who are in earlier stages of this disease, there has not been a death in that population. We can pause shipments for these patients. We can lift the hold on patients who can walk, while we investigate and try to isolate and find out what actually is causing this problem in the patients who died. And so I think that is a rational strategy. What is regrettable is the entire debacle that led to it. And that's why I do think it is fair to say that there were major worldview differences that Prasad had with what we're describing here that were untenable for him to continue to run FDA. And the way that the Sarepta debacle played out just did not give the public a lot of confidence in how the agency was being run.
One final related news item, more saber rattling by RFK Jr. at the nation's Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. On Monday, the health secretary tweeted that program has devolved into a morass of inefficiency, favoritism, and outright corruption, unquote. And Alicia, notably, one of the things he wants to fix is the way that lawyers who are working in the system are compensated. So what's your view of this and what the HHS secretary might or is likely to do here?
So just as a fast track summary, this no-fault system was set up by Congress in 1986 because the lawsuits against vaccine makers over alleged injuries to children from vaccines was threatening to drive a lot of vaccine makers from the market. So Congress set up this no-fault system where the government would have these special vaccine courts to review the evidence of alleged injuries and pay out claims. Now, this vaccine board, these vaccine special panels do not pay punitive damages. They do not allow the attorneys to collect contingency fees as a share of patient awards. Now, they do pay out the attorney fees for what they actually cost the patients. They do not pay the punitive damages and contingency fees that trial lawyers typically get in civil litigation. Now, the RFK, who has spearheaded many lawsuits against vaccines, and many of his friends have long bristled about these restrictions on what they can pay or earn in these vaccine courts. And they also want to make it easier to bring these claims and get awards. So what it appears from his tweet that he's looking to do is lower the standard of evidence and proof to bring and get awards. In other words, okay, well, there's some evidence that, or a patient could claim there's some evidence based on animal studies or such that vaccine causes autism, so they automatically get an award. So that's one thing that they appear to be doing. And the second thing, to your point, is that they appear to be looking at making trial lawyers eligible to receive maybe some kind of contingent fees or bigger payouts for bringing these claims. Now, all this threatens to could bankrupt this special trust fund that was set up to pay out these claims and force Congress to essentially bail it out. Now, I don't think Congress wants to do that. And so the end goal is basically to just eliminate and abolish this program.
Thank you, Alicia and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.